Sorry, who? Nigel who? In the news? What was that? Government Minister Nigel Fiddlesticks, was it? Nigel Fiddlesticks. Who are these people? I thought to myself as that bulletin played out in the background. And then I remembered they're the people who got the jobs after everybody resigned. After every politician you've ever heard of resigned from Boris Johnson's government. What was left, with a few exceptions who sort of clung on regardless, what was left? So Nigel Fiddlesticks, Nigel Huddleston there, accusing Gordon Brown of playing politics, for warning that the failure to do anything thus far to address this cost of living crisis is both urgent and considerable. And it's actually pretty awful. The worst thing I saw at the weekend was Zach Goldsmith accusing Conservative MPs who were investigating Boris Johnson's alleged lies to the House of Commons of being partisan. They're in the same party as you prune, albeit that they actually sit in the Houses of Parliament because they won by-elections or they won their seats at elections rather than just getting given a seat in the House of Lords by a bloke who you lend your holiday home to. But to be called partisan by someone who's in the same... We'll get onto that in the second hour. I'm wondering whether the UK is reaching its big lie moment with Boris Johnson that is actually comparable to Donald Trump now, with claims that this investigation by the Privileges Committee is somehow a witch hunt. Incredible. I mean, it's blue on blue. But we begin in the first hour with this strange scenario whereby a man who hasn't been Prime Minister for 12 years, has got more to say about the cost of living crisis than either the man who is Prime Minister now or the man or woman who will be Prime Minister next month. Just pause and think about that. Boris Johnson's been on holiday. He's been in Slovenia in an eco-hotel. I don't know where Nadeem Zahawi is. I think he's on holiday. He wrote something about how he's perfectly capable of working when he's on holiday, which doesn't sit entirely comfortably with the diktats coming down from senior members of the government that everybody should return to their offices and their place of work. So they're both on holiday, which is odd, but, you know, everybody needs a holiday, I suppose, and whether or not they would have done anything different had they been here, I honestly don't know. I think it might just get filed under optics. It might be, it might just be the reason why you should be here in the cost of living crisis is so that the country can see that someone's actually in charge. It's a bit like being on a boat and no one's got their hand on the tiller, as far as you can tell. You don't really want a remote control tiller from a Slovenian eco-hotel or a Barbadian beach paradise. You want to see a hand on the tiller, but maybe that is just a little bit shallow of us. I don't know. So they've got nothing to say. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are arguing over cutlery, as far as I can tell. I mean, they're certainly not arguing over anything you can eat or drink. Oh, I'm going to make it harder to get a degree if it's not something that can demonstrably improve your income, says Rishi Sunak. Well, I'm not giving any handouts, says Liz Truss, except when I am giving handouts, because I'm not ruling out giving any handouts. There's a little split in the Liz Truss campaign between the MPs who are going to have to go back to the country in the next couple of years and ask for people to vote for them, and the weird Tufton Street secretly funded, reduce all government, let the richest people in the world get even richer school of thought that clearly informs quite a lot of her policy pronouncements. So you have two people vying to be Prime Minister who've said next to nothing about the cost of living crisis except this curious contrast between raising taxes or helping people out. Not any use at all to those who don't earn enough to pay tax. And yet, as Rishi Sunak's team have pointed out, Liz Truss's proposals will reward people on salaries comparable to the Prime Minister's while doing next to nothing for people on minimum wage. And I don't quite get it. I mean, I get it a bit, but I'm going to have another day today where I invite you to explain something that is outwardly quite baffling. I'm also going to introduce you to, if you haven't heard it already, some of what Gordon Brown has been saying. Now, there is a danger, once politicians are out of the daily dogfight, of looking upon them with rose-tinted spectacles. I think Ed Balls is a big beneficiary of this, actually. He just seems like such a jolly fellow these days, Ed Balls. You sort of forget that he was ever involved in the internecine warfare at the heart of the Labour Party. I'm talking about the version 1 of the internecine warfare, when the Labour Party was actually winning elections despite biting chunks out of itself on a regular basis. And Ed Balls was up to his neck in all that stuff. But you look at him now as quite a jolly fellow. He's funny, he's bright, he's engaging. And I don't want to do the same with Gordon Brown. He was what I think the Americans or the Victorians call ornery, wasn't he? I mean, he was stubborn and angry, and he used to throw things around, we were told, and you know, personal skills perhaps a bit lacking. And then if you're really thick now, you'll probably be saying something about gold. If you've been completely gaslit and groomed by right-wing media, you'll be saying something about gold, because Gordon Brown sold some of our gold reserves at a point in time that turned out to be subsequently less than ideal. In other words, the price of gold went up after he'd sold the gold that we had, which somehow got turned into a huge millstone hung around his neck. Well, I say somehow. If you're very stupid and committed to punching yourself in the face every day in order to keep the status quo in place, then you swallow this stuff. You love this stuff. So you need to bear that in mind as well. Not a perfect politician by any stretch of the imagination. But if I played you this and set it in contrast to a Prime Minister who hasn't attended any Cobra meetings, as far as we know, about the cost of living crisis, who's not even in the country at the moment, a Chancellor of the Exchequer who who's still in post despite calling upon the Prime Minister to resign, a leadership battle being undertaken by two people who, it's like two bald men arguing over a comb, really, isn't it? And in the space of 12 years, you've gone from this to that. It is bizarre, but the question I'll ask you when I've given you a little taste of what Gordon Brown has to say is this. Very, very simply, and you can come at it from the angle that Nigel Fiddlesticks has come at it from as well. I'm told he's an MP for somewhere in Worcestershire. It's not my manor, is it? No, that's Wire Forest, that's someone else. So you get wheeled out as someone who's got a job in government by dint of everybody with even a scintilla of talent being compelled to resign. Coming out and claiming that Gordon Brown should shut up and go away and is only doing this for political. You can tell me why this is not actually bad for the Tories, if you want, on 0345 6060 973. But the question will be this. Why is a man who hasn't been Prime Minister for 12 years doing more to both address and warn about the cost of living crisis than the man who is Prime Minister now, or the man or woman who will be Prime Minister next month? Just why? Just give me the why of it. 0345 6060 973. And here he is, Gordon Brown, Texture Light Sun.
Families with children, pensioners, particularly pensioner couples, and disabled people, because they've lost out from the three budgets this year and are not properly protected, given what you are saying, which is this unique rise in heating costs that's going to take place on October the 1st. That's why it's a financial time bomb. And if you don't take action now and adjust the benefit system and take the action on energy prices, then you will not be able to have the computers in place that can pay the benefits by October the 1st. So this week is the key week. The government's got to take action. I want the two leadership candidates and Boris Johnson to get together. If they won't, I think Parliament should be recalled. And there should be emergency meetings of COBRA, because we're not just dealing with the cost of living crisis. There's a potential energy shortage. There's a shortage of storage space. People may have to cut back on energy use, and it'd be better to do it by, for example, cutting back on lighting public buildings and so on and so forth, in case we have to have some sort of rationing. And of course, we've got a National Health Service crisis, and that's going to be exaggerated because they will not have the money to pay their bills given the rate of inflation. So I think the Health Secretary is admitting this today, and these are the things that are going to be discussed, how we avoid this very hard winter that will hit the poorest families most. It's an unbearable burden of unpayable bills for people who will suffer, I think, unspeakable suffering that we haven't seen before in the recent years, simply because people are going to go to school as children, ill-clad and undernourished, and because people will not be able to turn up the heating.
The unbearable burden of unpayable bills causing, unbearable suffering. That's incredible, right? Do you know, I'm actually going to play it to you again, even though it's so long, because I really think you need to pay attention to this. Try to take your scarf off. If you've got a Conservative scarf tied around your neck so tightly that it's cut off the flow of blood to your brain, or a Brexity scarf or whatever it is, the reason why you continue to do really silly things, just take it off for a minute and listen to this. Listen to the list of things, the stuff that could be happening, the budget that could be happening, the Cobra meetings that could be happening, the recall of Parliament that could be happening, rationing at a public sector level that could be happening, the NHS in need of help that could be happening, the idea that the NHS isn't going to be able to pay its energy bills. Just think about all of this. Have another listen to it. Not a perfect PM, not a perfect politician, nothing, anything like that, but just someone talking to you about the reality of right now. He's not even after your votes. Just have another listen and then tell me why this is happening, why he is doing this and saying this, while the man who is currently Prime Minister is doing absolutely nothing, and the two people who are vying to be Prime Minister by the end of next month are not far behind. Just why? Here he is again.
Families with children, pensioners, particularly pensioner couples, and disabled people, because they've lost out from the three budgets this year and are not properly protected, given what you are saying, which is this unique rise in heating costs that's going to take place on October the 1st. That's why it's a financial time bomb. And if you don't take action now and adjust the benefit system and take the action on energy prices, then you will not be able to have the computers in place that can pay the benefits by October the 1st. So this week is the key week. The government's got to take action. I want the two leadership candidates and Boris Johnson to get together. If they won't, I think Parliament should be recalled, and there should be emergency meetings of Cobra, because we're not just dealing with the cost of living crisis. There's a potential energy shortage. There's a shortage of storage space. People may have to cut back on energy use, and it'd be better to do it by, for example, cutting back on lighting public buildings and so on and so forth, in case we have to have some sort of rationing. And of course, we've got a National Health Service crisis, and that's going to be exaggerated because they will not have the money to pay their bills given the rate of inflation. So I think the Health Secretary is admitting this today, and these are the things that are going to be discussed, how we avoid this very hard winter that will hit the poorest families most. It's an unbearable burden of unpayable bills for people who will suffer, I think, unspeakable suffering that we haven't seen before in the recent years, simply because people are going to go to school as children, ill-clad and undernourished, and because people will not be able to turn up their heating.
That's Dickensian, ill-clad and undernourished. Even the language sounds like something from another age. The unbearable burden of unpayable bills causing unspeakable suffering. The current Prime Minister comes back from holiday today. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, I think, is still on his. The two people vying to be Prime Minister by the end of next month are arguing over cutlery and change. What's happening? And I don't cast myself this morning in the role of someone pretending to be baffled, or someone who's just woken up from a coma, or someone who's arrived from an alien planet and asked to take me to your leader. Oh, sorry, I can't, he's on holiday. I genuinely want to hear what your explanation for it is, because right now I haven't actually got one. I mean, listen, well, you could probably guess where I'd put Boris Johnson and Gordon Brown on the list of politicians you would trust or want to have in charge at a time of crisis. But that aside, I genuinely can't explain to you why man who hasn't been Prime Minister for 12 years has got more to say and more ideas about the cost of living crisis than the man who's Prime Minister now and the two people who are going to, one of whom will be Prime Minister by the end of next month. Just explain it to me, not to a mythical alien or a recently roused comatose patient. Explain it to me, someone who does this stuff for a living. 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. The year is 2022. Gordon Brown has not been Prime Minister since 2010. Boris Johnson is currently Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss will be Prime Minister next month. And yet it's Brown and not Johnson, Sunak or Truss who has the most to say and perhaps the best ideas, and I say perhaps because I don't know what the other three's ideas are, perhaps the best ideas about how to deal with, well, the unbearable burden of unpayable bills causing unspeakable suffering. Why? Uzma is in Blackburn. Uzma, what is going on here?
I think there's a few things. Boris just doesn't care anymore. He didn't have the solutions for anything, really, did he? I mean, look at the mess we're in. So he doesn't care. Rishi and Liz don't want to say anything that's going to rock the Tory blue boat. And the Tories don't really, overall, their voting, they're talking to the 160,000 that want to hear about whatever.
And are they not? They're not facing the unbearable burden of unpayable bills causing unspeakable suffering.
Most of them probably are not.
No.
Most of them probably are not, to be honest. Maybe some are. But the bottom line is Gordon Brown has something that none of these people have, and that's a moral compass. And they used him, the Tories used him when they wanted the referendum in Scotland to go their way. They let him go out there and plead the case for the union, and he was praised for it, and he did.
And he's still getting gypped for it now. I can in my inbox, there's people still picking up on that as well.
Yeah. So he did it, and that was fine. But when you have somebody that's actually talking sense, that probably sees what's happening to average people, because he hasn't gone down the making trillions route that Tony Blair did. He hasn't,
he gives most of it to charity, even when he gets paid a fortune for doing speeches and writing books and things, and gives huge proportions of it away, if not all of it.
You see poverty and you understand that people are going to die and suffer, then maybe they need to listen to him, because this shower of rubbish do not have an idea between them.
Right. I mean, this is a bleak analysis, and it's evidenced, but that doesn't mean that it's true. I think most people would probably agree with you about Boris Johnson, apart from the absolute weirdos now who are embarking on an attempt to somehow get rid of the inquiry into whether or not he lied to the House of Commons, largely because they know that he did. So we'll park them for the minute, the sort of Nadine Dorries-shaped contributors to public discourse. It's harder to get my head around why Sunak and Truss aren't doing anything. Is it? And yet, in the absence of another explanation, the simplest one probably fits. It is simply because they are speaking only and exclusively to the men and women who will decide who wins the Conservative leadership election. And for them, the looming cost of living crisis is simply not urgent or an emergency.
Yes. You're absolutely right.
Well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because I'm saying what you said back to you. So,
no, but if it was a general election, they would be saying something different. But Rishi stood in Tunbridge Wells and told them that the urban areas, I'm going to divert the money. Yeah, Tunbridge Wells does have disadvantage, but not as much as Haringey or places in Manchester or Liverpool. But he stood there quite proudly, again, like he did with his working class little thing that he did in that clip all those years ago. Yeah. And they don't. I get the feeling, and maybe I'm just cynical, but I just don't think they care. I don't think they understand or they care or they're bothered about anything but getting into power. Liz Truss, I think, is trying. She understands the NI hike being reversed might give some money back.
Not Northern Ireland, just to clarify.
But just if you think about the people that are going to suffer the most, maybe that would help them. But that's not the people that are right at the bottom of the ones on universal credit and stuff. It's not going to help them. Things like she's not thinking about the children that are going to go to school hungry, children are going to go to school dirty, not with uniform. I teach, and we have parents ringing now saying, "Can somebody help me buy a uniform?" That's how dire the situation is now. We're not in November. We're not in October.
No.
We're not in the next price hike in January. So I just don't think that anybody at all in government cares. I don't think Labour are making a big noise about it. They're not there banging on the doors and demanding something. I think they're just I don't know what they're doing.
What could they be doing different? I mean, bearing in mind Gordon Brown is a Labour politician, although he's not, part of the current.
He's not.
What should Starmer be doing differently?
Well, Starmer should be doing what Gordon Brown is doing. Yeah, he should be saying these things because he can stand at the dispatch box on the 6th of September or whenever the first Wednesday is and say that and repeat what he's been saying for the last 6 weeks to the new PM. Which will be a laugh anyway, but I actually.
Yeah, I think you're right to include them. I think Keir Starmer should be doing more as well. I mean, I suppose for him the problem is what he's not at PMQs.
He doesn't have an idea, does he? He does not have an idea.
Well, unless he tells you what it is, you are perfectly entitled to conclude that he doesn't.
I actually think somebody should make Mick Lynch Prime Minister for the next 6 months because I think we might get something done. Because he's the only person I've heard in the last 6 months that has actually said the truth, spoken it honestly. I listened to part of the podcast he did with you. the man has an answer. He doesn't lie. He's upfront.
He's a very impressive. I mean, we didn't talk about Brexit because he wasn't General Secretary of the RMT when they made that decision. But, again, nobody's perfect. And also, he wouldn't be interested. He exists solely to represent the interests of his membership, his RMT membership.
That's the kind of politicians we need.
Conviction.
That will fight.
Conviction politicians. Well, all right, listen, I'm going to take your line and I'm going to invite people who are very cross with that analysis to give me theirs.
They can do.
No, well, I hope they do, because the idea that this is happening because only Gordon Brown cares and Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss don't is a bleak analysis. Usma's backed it up with some evidence, lots of supporting commentary. You as a Conservative voter, even if you're not massively enamoured of any or one or two of the three people that we're talking about, you object to that furiously. You reject that completely. Of course they care. That's why they've gone into politics. It's why they want to be Prime Minister. So what's your answer to the question of why a man who hasn't been in the job for 12 years is doing more, making more sense, having better ideas than the three people who are at the front of the Conservative Party, the current Prime Minister and the two people vying to be the next Prime Minister? Why have they got so little to say about the unbearable burden of unpayable bills causing unspeakable suffering? And it's not as if there isn't flesh on the bones either. Gordon Brown talking about emergency budgets. Get all three of them to sit down around a table. Sunak, Truss, Johnson working together, calling Cobra meetings, emergency meetings of Cobra, recalling Parliament, rationing energy for public buildings, turning off the lights, saving energy, addressing the problems of energy shortages and energy storage. So it may not just be the cost of it, it may be the shortage of it. And the current Health Secretary, and I'll give you 50p if you know who it is, Steve Barclay, warning that the NHS it's going to be too late to avert a crisis if they keep delaying action until a new Prime Minister is imposed. So even their own Health Secretary, Boris Johnson's current Health Secretary, who, like Nigel Fiddlesticks, is only in the job because everybody else resigned, is warning that if the it's not purgatory, what's the word? Limbo. If the limbo remains, then it's going to be too late to avert another massive crisis for the NHS. And what do you do if you like these people? Do you just sit there going, oh, shut up, James? Shut up, Usma? I don't know what you do. What do you do? If you're sitting there going, oh, well, Gordon Brown sold the gold. This is 2022. This is the Secretary of State for Health in Boris Johnson's government warning about imminent crises. And then you've got a fella who's got absolutely no skin in the game anymore. He doesn't need your votes. He doesn't want your money. Doesn't give a fig what sort of write-ups he gets in the right-wing newspapers. Gordon Brown warning of an unbearable burden of unpayable bills causing unspeakable suffering. And Rishi Sunak spent yesterday talking about why people whose degrees don't immediately deliver an increase in income shouldn't be able to do those degrees in the first place. Sorry, what? Pardon? Martin's in Warwick. Martin, why is this happening?
Hi, James. Hi. I think it's a really interesting debate. I think for me, it splits down to emotional versus rational. When you mention Gordon Brown, 12 years out of the game, has no skin in the game.
Yes.
He's just being rational. He's just saying it as it is because he recognises human cost and crisis. Whereas I think Boris' emotional gain is, well, you kicked me out, so I'm now looking at my next future opportunity.
Is he sulking, do you think? Is he sulking a bit?
I think he always sulks. Yeah. I think unless he gets his way, he's sulking and he plays games. And unfortunately, we are beyond that. People are in crisis. This is not a game. And it's not about his memoirs and I think that's where he's focused. You kicked me out. It's your fault. The Daily Mail supports that about the committee, about his behaviours. But I think for Truss and for Rishi, I think then it's about emotional attachment to winning. Don't say anything that makes you step on a landmine that could end your chances. And I think that's what they call a political game, whereas I think for good or bad in terms of Brown's historical...
It's easier to understand why Brown is doing it.
He actually cares.
Yeah, I think it's easier to understand why Brown is doing it. And a lot of variations on the same theme coming in, tallying with yours. I mean, in a nutshell, he answers to himself and his conscience and no one else, not voters, not Conservative Party members, not even colleagues. But why Sunak and Truss are not, and why Johnson is not, is possibly a bit easier to understand than why Sunak and Truss are not. And your argument that if the people who are choosing the next leader of the Conservative Party or go the next Prime Minister aren't that fussed about the cost of living crisis, why on earth would they risk damaging their campaigns by going substantive, by going in hard, by doing something meaningful. I don't know that I want to agree with you, and therefore I don't know that I currently can agree with you. Because some of this stuff, having Cobra meetings, recalling Parliament, rationing energy in public buildings, I don't think that would hurt or harm putative or actual leadership campaigns. I don't think it would harm Truss or Sunak to call for this stuff, because it's up to Johnson whether it happens or not. Maybe they don't want to be seen to be criticising Johnson because he remains... Oh, there it is. We'll explore that idea a little bit further after the headlines with Holly Harris. 33 minutes after 10. So I think two of the four are perhaps a little bit easier to understand than the most important two, the two who are currently vying to be Prime Minister. It's quite easy to understand why Gordon Brown is doing what Gordon Brown is doing. He feels that he has to. He, whether you like him or not, whether you agree with him or not, whether you ever voted for him or not, there is a sense within him that you could describe as public service, a public service vocation. And he is very, very worried about the direction of traffic, and therefore he has issued an urgent warning about the unbearable burden of unpayable bills causing unspeakable suffering. And it is characteristically detailed, evidenced, and dry. I mean, he is not a passionate politician outwardly, although I think he's a very passionate politician inwardly. And I think we can get our head around why Boris Johnson is doing what Boris Johnson is doing, can't we? He is lazy, and he's probably sulking. And he probably, I think, even though many people remain devoted to the cult of personality that's grown up around him over the years, he doesn't really care. He will not be lying awake at night in his Slovenian eco hotel worrying about people who can't pay their bills, or parents who can't afford school uniform, or people who will be congregating in public libraries come the winter because that's the only place they can go to keep warm for a couple of hours. Boris Johnson, I think we can probably all agree, but again, whenever I say that, it's an invitation to you to ring in and disagree. I don't think he's going to be particularly worried about the looming impacts of ever-increasing energy prices and the cost of living. And I think Gordon Brown is. I do think it keeps him awake at night. I do think he worries about it. I do think he sits at his desk trying to come up with solutions and come up with fixes. And I imagine it drives Mrs. Brown potty. And then he, every now and then, feels that the situation is so dire that he has to come out and speak. So I think, and those are just early conclusions, I think we can probably achieve a degree of consensus about the motivations of Gordon Brown and Boris Johnson. They are polar opposites of politicians. Gordon Brown, despite not being in the job for 12 years, cares about the cost of living crisis and is deeply, deeply concerned about the inaction coming from government. Boris Johnson, who is Prime Minister and remains so for a few weeks, doesn't care about the cost of living crisis and is therefore entirely responsible for the inaction coming from his government. Please disagree with that, because it's a bloody terrifying analysis, and yet at the moment I can't see a single chink in its armour. 0345 6060 973. And then you come to Truss and Sunak. And let's just look at Boris Johnson's to-do list if Gordon Brown were to write it. You have an emergency budget. You have Cobra meetings, emergency Cobra meetings. You have the recall of Parliament so that any big decisions taken have a full parliamentary mandate. You have decisions like the rationing of energy in public buildings, turning off the lights in public, saving energy on a national scale. And then you have the Secretary of State for Health warning that if the NHS isn't addressed sooner rather than later, then by the time there's a new Prime Minister in place, it will be too late. So my question to you becomes, why are Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss not doing any of the things that Gordon Brown is doing? All right? Have a think. Give me a call. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Joseph's in Swindon. Joseph, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. What I would say, James, you previously spoke about the book that Kwasi Kwarteng and Miss Priti Patel have written.
It was Britannia Unchained.
Britannia,
yes.
Unchained. One of the key things they point out, and I think a lot of conservatives, I don't want to steer, but I think most conservative party members think along that line. The poor people in Britain do not work hard enough. So that feed into that psyche. And I think the psyche of that party is that if you work a bit harder, if you pick up more extra time, if you work more hard, you'll be able to pay your bill. Hence why they're not addressing it. Most of the politicians in the Conservative Party is not addressing it. Because as far as they're concerned, if we Brits work a bit harder, we will afford to pay the rises. We can do it. So
if you are facing the unbearable burden of unpayable bills and therefore unspeakable suffering, subconsciously or in some cases consciously, because as you point out, they've put their names to a book about it, they think that it's somehow your fault. And so do the Conservative Party members who are going to be choosing the next Prime Minister. So they're not doing anything about it because there's nothing in it for them. And that would be the pragmatic approach. And then if you want to go a little bit deeper into the subconscious, it's because they don't really believe that people are victims of the cost of living crisis. They are victims of their own laziness and indolence.
I
hope you're wrong. I hope you're wrong on that.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking just that you just fit into that psyche that if you're on benefits, you're not working hard enough. If you're not succeeding or if you're not in that right job that is paying you and you're working and you're not getting paid, you should do something about it. It's not your boss should pay you more. It's not that you should get a raise of salary. You need to work harder. You just need to do a little bit more to make it, and not to the state. But
there's a flaw in your reasoning, Joseph, because come October, when these energy prices go up, anybody with even a modicum of understanding, and you have to credit Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss with having at least a modicum of understanding, that they know that this is going to hit people who are a million miles away from the lazy stereotype of the sort of feckless, work-shy scrounger or the unproductive worker. This is going to hit everybody. This is going to hit millions of people who would traditionally see themselves as conservative voters. So you might be right in the short term, but there's an astonishing lack of vision if they're really not doing anything to head off some of the nightmare that's on the horizon, because it's going to hit people who don't fall into the category that you describe, even if they believe in that category.
The British public have bought into that for the last 12 years of conservative rulership. We have already bought into that. The problem we have is not how the state is run, is not how the government is running the state. The problem is the people. And they always tell you, a little bit more cut from you. We're going to take a little bit more from you. The NHS, the problem is not how the NHS is run. The problem is the people in the NHS. It's not who governing it. So we already bought into that psyche. We blame Europe for years. It's not politicians, it's not we, it's them. And they always makes us feel, and they have also, you come across it, they have always makes us, for the last 12 years, they always told us, we're the problem, not governance, not Boris Johnson. He looks at people and he says, not me is the problem. No, I am trying to help you guys here. You are the problem. And we have already bought into that. So they know we already bought in that some of the problem we cause it is not the government.
I don't know that I don't agree with everything you've said, but I haven't got a better explanation. I am truly today in the position of being the vacuum into which any answers and any theories can move. There's clearly a lot of truth in what you say. I wonder whether actually listening to you and thinking of that infernal book that they wrote, British workers are among the laziest in the world. I wonder whether this small state rhetoric is relevant to this as well, because what Gordon Brown is describing is robust government or big government, which, remember, they've turned into a dirty word. Budgets, recalling Parliament, rationing energy in public buildings, NHS, Cobra meetings, all of this is big government. We saw the need for big government during the COVID crisis, and you might not need it all the time, but you don't get rid of it, because when you do need it, everything will be worse than it needs to be. So this is a massive cost of living crisis is like the economic equivalent of a coronavirus, right? And what we're seeing now with these warnings from the Secretary of State for Health, the Conservative Secretary of State for Health, and the former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown, think of that as the pictures from Italy. Oh, this is good. So what we're seeing now is the economic equivalent of the pictures from the Italian hospitals. Except they are warnings and they are sums and figures. So take Martin Lewis, Gordon Brown and Stephen Barclay. There you have a former Labour Prime Minister, a Conservative Secretary of State for Health and a scrupulously impartial public figure. Genius as well, in my opinion. So Martin Lewis, Gordon Brown and Stephen Barclay, they are the pictures from Italian hospitals. If the cost of living crisis is the economic equivalent of the coronavirus, then Lewis, Brown and Barclay are the Italian hospitals. That's the footage that we saw, expecting Boris Johnson to react, expecting Boris Johnson to do something. Look what's coming. And Boris Johnson just blithely insisted that it wasn't coming and did nothing until it was actually here. Right, letting Cheltenham Festival go ahead, having the Atletico Madrid game up in Liverpool. I mean, unbelievable, shaking hands with patients. So you remember that. That's where we are now. We're looking at the pictures coming from Italy as represented by Martin Lewis, Gordon Brown and Stephen Barclay, and we're doing nothing. Why? Why are Sunak and Truss silent, more or less, on this? Answer: because they are part of an ideology, as Joseph has just articulated, that sees people as being somehow personally responsible for any problems that they face. And I will add to that, inspired by his analysis, they are anemic when it comes to government, or allergic to government. They keep talking about cutting government, cutting regulations, cutting red tape. It's actually quite lazy in its purest form. We think politicians should do less and have less power. So they don't want to address these problems and these issues because it would become an ideological reminder of how important, quotes, big end quotes, government actually is. Cyril is in Ljubljana in Slovenia. Cyril, what would you like to say?
Hey, hi. It's me, the cartoonist from Slovenia.
Oh, fantastic. It's good to hear from you again, Cyril.
Receiver of the much coveted Ray Liotta Award.
Yes, of course you are.
Listen, on Sunday I was taking a nice trip with a boat on Ljubljanica River, which runs through the capital city of Ljubljana.
Lovely.
And with a couple of friends, and we decided to turn around, and I look up, and who do I see sitting on a bench, if not Boris himself and his carry. And of course, I immediately figured out that they had to visit the capital city since they visited Slovenia.
Yes.
They were actually sitting in the hotel, staying at a hotel in the northern part.
Gosh.
And I says to him, "Hi, Boris." Says he, "Hi." I said to him, "Do you enjoy yourself?" They said, "Yes, we do." I said, "Well, welcome to Slovenia." And he replied, "Thank you." And I said, listen.
Yeah.
To him, I'm a cartoonist, and I did a couple of covers featuring you, and I'm also doing a comic book that with a main character that is also, formed partially by you. So you shouldn't be thanking me. I thank you, as a cartoonist. And this, then we had to carry, sorry for the pun, on. But we discussed it with friends, and it was such an unpleasant meeting, nevertheless.
Of course.
Because I really, partially because of my involvement, and I did have to invest myself emotionally a bit while I was drawing him, but I absolutely detest the man. I really, I think that if his lips are moving, he's lying, right?
Yeah.
So the feeling...
it's a bit, I mean, I don't know what the Slovenian political situation is at the moment, but I mean...
better. It is better. We have now this centre-leftist government which does recognize that the present situation is a matter of commons.
Yeah. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? Acknowledging that there's... it's like there's a tsunami coming towards us, and
we have to stick together. The poem that I remember when I was leaving is the poem by American poet Dwyer Miller, the famous poet. She said, her line goes, "I'm American bred," but I would change it. "I'm Slovenian bred. I've seen much to hate there, much to forgive. But in a world where England is finished and dead, I do not wish to live."
God.
And I think this is the question. Do you wish to live? It's a matter of commons, it's a matter of sticking together, and it's also a matter of common decency.
Is it fair? I mean, I honestly don't know the answer to this question, and I'm struck by you bumping into him on his holidays, because it clearly struck. It struck. Well, yeah, you would be, wouldn't you? You probably thought you were having some sort of fever dream. But
I did.
What the hell? I was drawing him yesterday, and now he's sitting in front of me on a bench.
Exactly.
Hang on.
Sorry.
Is it wrong for him to be on holiday? Is it like going on holiday in the
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
Of course. And the comic book that I'm drawing is King Ibi. And since King Ibi by Alfred Jarry.
Fantastic.
The king usurper kills the old king, doesn't have any conscience, doesn't any scruples, kills everybody, lies, steals, this is the comic story that I'm writing, drawing now.
I look forward to seeing
author.
it. I look forward to seeing
I
it.
should send you maybe a preview. You will recognize a bit of Trump and a bit of Boris.
I look forward. No, do send me one. I'd love to see that. I'm tempted to give you another Ray Liotta, Cyril, but you've already got one, and I don't want you to be greedy.
I've got one. I treasure it. Rip Ray Liotta. He was great, and I treasured my.
Indeed. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm sorry that you had your day out spoiled in such an unpleasant fashion, but at least it's given you a story to tell, Cyril. So you, as a storyteller, you would appreciate that. So 10:47 is the time. He's right, isn't he? I sometimes try a little bit too hard to be generous in the interests of, I don't know, I still feel keenly for cultists. If you're still a member of the cult, oh yeah, he's the best, he's doing his best, he's great. I kind of like you. I don't like Johnson much, but you're a decent person, I'm sure. So I sort of think, well, maybe we give him a break on this one, because the supporters and the fans must just be feeling so awful about everything they've done to the country. But he shouldn't be on holiday, should he? Really? Not now. And he's going on holiday permanently in about 6 weeks' time. The rest of his life is going to be a holiday. What's he doing on holiday now? Right now. I think my coronavirus allegory works quite well, doesn't it? This is as if when those pictures started dropping. Imagine if when those pictures started dropping from Italy of what was likely to happen to us in the very near future. Imagine if then Boris Johnson had started skipping Cobra meetings and not making... Oh, he did. 10:51 is the time. Listen, I guess it's inevitable, isn't it? If he can do no wrong, he can do no wrong. If he can preside over avoidable deaths, if he can go sort of AWOL at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, if he can lie to you, lie to Parliament, lie to everybody that he ever comes into contact with, preside over all sorts of disasters, and then stand up and say that he's played a blinder and done a brilliant job, and you're going to clap and cheer and say, yes, he has, then you're not going to think there's anything wrong with him going on holiday either. And you're probably going to join this astonishing Daily Mail campaign to somehow call off the Privileges Committee investigation into whether or not he misled the House of Commons. Because that's what cults look like. That is, I'm afraid, cult, C-U-L-T, all day long. That is what they look like. He can do no wrong. So I get that in the sense of I understand it. I'll never get it in the sense of being able to fully get my head around how anyone could end up in that sort of hole. So you probably think it's fine that he's gone on holiday, even though he's only got about 6 weeks of work left in the job. And if you listen to Gordon Brown, this is, apart from those early days of the coronavirus when he did go AWOL, this is by far the biggest crisis the country has faced in generations. And I am going to make you listen to Gordon Brown again before you have a crack at answering the question of why Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak aren't doing any of the things that Gordon Brown is calling for.
Families with children, pensioners, particularly pensioner couples, and disabled people, because they've lost out from the three budgets this year and are not properly protected, given what you are saying, which is this unique rise in heating costs that's going to take place on October the 1st. That's why it's a financial time bomb. And if you don't take action now and adjust the benefit system and take the action on energy prices, then you will not be able to have the computers in place that can pay the benefits by October the 1st. So this week is the key week. The government's got to take action. I want the two leadership candidates and Boris Johnson to get together. If they won't, I think Parliament should be recalled. And there should be emergency meetings of COBRA, because we're not just dealing with the cost of living crisis. There's a potential energy shortage. There's a shortage of storage space. People may have to cut back on energy use, and it'd be better to do it by, for example, cutting back on lighting public buildings and so on and so forth, in case we have to have some sort of rationing. And of course, we've got a National Health Service crisis, and that's going to be exaggerated because they will not have the money to pay their bills given the rate of inflation. So I think the Health Secretary is admitting this today, and these are the things that are going to be discussed, how we avoid this very hard winter that will hit the poorest families most. It's an unbearable burden of unpayable bills for people who will suffer, I think, unspeakable suffering that we haven't seen before in the recent years, simply because people are going to go to school as children, ill-clad and undernourished, and because people will not be able to turn up the heating.
So Liz Truss is talking about possible tax cuts, which obviously the more you earn, the more you benefit from a tax cut. And the less you earn, the less you benefit from a tax cut. If you don't earn enough to pay tax or to pay a significant amount of tax, that's naff use to you. While Rishi Sunak is sort of national insurance, reversing his own national insurance policies. Why are neither of them talking about any of this stuff? I think I know. I've worked it out during the course of the hour. But I'll tell you before the next news bulletin, unless a caller gets there first. James is in Wimbledon. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Massive fan, so thanks for taking my call.
You're very kind.
So I've been listening to you a lot over the years, and we all know Boris has got a big ego.
Yes.
And he's feeling bruised from being stitched up.
That's how he sees it. That's how he
sees it. And I wonder, him being away at the moment is sort of building a bit of a scorched earth policy, builds up problems, and then is a sort of a nightmare for his successor.
Gosh.
And that explains why he's sort of asleep at the wheel, or on purpose. He's wide awake, but he's just off enjoying time.
Why should I do anything, given that Liz Truss stayed loyal, didn't she, publicly, although she was manoeuvring behind the scenes to be in pole position when the flag actually dropped for the start of the race. But Rishi Sunak was one of the key architects of Johnson's defenestration. Why the hell Johnson will be thinking, should I do anything to help the country? Because he sees everything through the lens of his own ego. Therefore, there's a logic to the idea that the worse things are for whoever succeeds me, the happier I'll be, says Boris Johnson. Almost the definition of being unpatriotic, isn't it, ironically enough?
Absolutely. And I think it's sort of in his character. Narcissistic tendencies, it could be absolutely what he's thinking about.
I can't remember the last time I've been so keen for every single caller to the programme to be wrong. Even though you're providing better answers to the question that I've managed to provide myself, all of these answers are horrible and bleak, aren't they? The idea that you now have a Prime Minister in place. In the same way, what do you think Donald Trump would have done with Joe Biden taking over? Do you think Donald Trump would have been happy or sad if the country Joe Biden inherited was in a much bigger mess when Joe Biden took over than it was on the day that the election was actually conducted? And that's a rhetorical question. You know the answer to that. So despite being in the same party, do you think Boris Johnson would be happy or sad if whoever succeeds him had a whole heap of problems that hadn't been there and wouldn't have been there if Boris Johnson had done his job better? I don't know. It's James's point. I'm just leaving it up there for you. Katie's in Brighton. Thank you, James. Katie, what would you like to say?
Well, in terms of Sunak or Truss, I think neither of them are going to declare or come up with a solution to the current problem. I don't think they have one, and they're not going to let us know that because they want to get elected. So they're going to play their cards very close to their chest.
Why? Well, what's the logic there, though? Because I know I'm not necessarily the target, but in terms of the next general election, which they must have an eye on, or at least part of an eye on,
yeah.
I'd want they'd want to be able to look back and say, and maybe I suppose wait till they get into power and see what they do. But why would they not want to be promising the earth on this when they could get political capital out of it?
Well, I don't know that I have an answer for that. But I wouldn't believe a word they say anyway, because they've worked in...
that works in their favour. It means they can say anything. And they're saying nothing. It's just doing so little that I find so remarkable.
Well, it is quite frightening, isn't it? It is quite frightening. As for Boris going on holiday, part of me is really pleased that he's out of the way.
Yeah.
Another part of me just thinks he's been on holiday since he moved into number 10, as far as I can see. It's all photo opportunities, Lego factories, going up in jets or whatever, having his photo done at every opportunity. And I was talking to a friend the other day saying it feels to me, living in this country at the moment, it feels like living on the Marie Celeste. There's nobody steering the ship. Nobody's making sure that the thing isn't creaking and falling apart. Nobody's put the bins out. Nobody's made sure there's food in the fridge. Nobody's got any medical attention or education. There is nothing. And my feeling is, because I'm quite interested in the divide between what makes somebody vote Tory and what makes somebody vote Labour. So I was brought up with this idea that Tories look after themselves and are about money, and Labour want a general good standard of education, health, housing, etc. for everybody. And I've found very little to actually disprove that. So, but I do feel that Tories almost lack an empathy gene. So if you haven't been born with a silver spoon in your mouth,
or you haven't achieved a silver spoon.
Well,
latterly, because they always wheel out the self-made.
But more to do with entitlement.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm entitled because I come from the upper echelons. Frankly, they don't care, and don't expect them to care because they don't have the capacity. And it's exactly.
Some do.
Some do. I'm exaggerating, but Boris Johnson is the epitome of that kind of narcissistic. I'll do what I want to do. The rest of you can go with.
Why do people like it who aren't necessarily like? They wouldn't like the same. Is it because deep down they kind of think, "Oh, I wish I could behave like that. I wish I could do whatever I want."
I mean, he does have that kind of Joshy, very kind of.
Yeah.
But
I fell
why
for it
people fall for it, I don't know. And actually, when people bash him, which I actually feel slightly sorry for the man, because I actually think this is a mental health condition, narcissism, and narcissists never present for treatment because they don't have a problem.
There's nothing wrong with them, and in fact, I think under that diagnosis, which neither of us are qualified to give, that this would be described as narcissistic destruction, to tie in with James's theory before you came on, that he actually quite likes the idea of his successor inheriting a skip fire that could have been avoided. Oh, it's 11 o'clock. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Chris is in Brecon, having listened to Gordon Brown speak 3 times this morning. Chris says he is very simply asking the government to do its actual job. Wow. Yeah, I wish I'd thought of that. Chris, that's all he's doing. 12 years out of the job, asking the bloke currently in the job to actually just do the job. And he won't, and he isn't, and he is unlikely to do so. So we have this continuing limbo until the first week in September when a replacement arrives. And that's 5 weeks wasted, isn't it? It could have been used to do all of the things that Gordon Brown has listed today. Right, I'm going to indulge myself a bit on the next subject. I kind of want your help on it. Putting a lot of pressure on you at the moment. I'm basically asking you every day to convince me that things aren't as bad as they seem to be to me. It's a little bit like, when the crowd finally realised that the emperor was naked and everybody in the crowd started booing and hissing and pointing. See, that would be an echo chamber, wouldn't it? When once everybody had realised that the emperor was naked. I think we're getting close to that moment together now. Everybody's realised that the emperor is naked, and therefore the only people who'd used the word echo chamber are the kind of tiny number of probably the 2 tailors, the 2 bogus tailors who flogged the invisible suit to the emperor. I don't know who else would do that. But I am conscious of asking you increasingly to persuade me that things aren't as bad as they seem to be. And even by the standards of the Daily Mail, what is happening now is actually incredible. And perhaps inevitably, Nadine Dorries has joined in ways that I think are actually quite damaging to our democracy. So what you have now is a desperate attempt by members of the cult, and this includes, I don't know whether it includes the owner of the Daily Mail. I don't know enough. I don't have the contacts. I don't have the insights. But the current editor of the Daily Mail and the so-called editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail are clearly a little bit in love with Boris Johnson. I think the best thing that I've ever read about the kind of men who inhabit those positions is that the reason why they like Boris Johnson is because he's capable of speaking to women. That these are men who spend their lives being terrified of engagement with women. It's a little bit simplistic and possibly a little bit unfair, but the other best thing I ever read about Paul Dacre is that he never goes to a cobbler's. He never has to go to a cobbler's because his shoes only ever touch the pavement between the door of Associated Newspapers and the door of his chauffeur-driven car. The rest of the time he walks exclusively on carpet. And they are clearly a little bit in love with Boris Johnson. And I don't use that in a sort of homoerotic sense. I just mean that they will forgive him anything in a way that normally involves a degree of romantic devotion or something cultish. And the extension of that being a little bit in love with Boris Johnson now reaches the part that other political stories have never reached in this country, where you have senior politicians and incredibly influential newspaper executives calling for an investigation into a corrupt politician to be called off because they're frightened that the conclusion will inevitably find that there has been corruption. Just stop and think about that for a minute. They're calling for an investigation into a corrupt politician to be called off because they're still in love with the corrupt politician. Tories must quit Boris witch hunt is the front page of the Daily Mail today. Minister tells MPs to resign from rigged Partygate probe. So you remember when I talked to you about the enemies of the people front page that attack judges? Or I spoke to you about the Crush the Saboteurs front page that attacked democratically elected MPs. And I spoke to you about the Our Remainer Universities front page that attacked academic freedom and academic independence. I think this is the worst. I think this is the worst, not because I care particularly about the individuals being attacked, but because they are Conservative MPs. So that fear that we had, that fear that I have, about the direction of traffic and the fact that we have occasionally started to use the F word when discussing British politics, which is not a day I thought would ever dawn. When they you get that fascistic movement, that fascistic direction when everybody becomes an enemy except the absolute fellow travellers. Unless you're a fully paid up member of the cult, you're actually the enemy. I never thought I'd see the day when Conservative MPs, who by definition these days are supporters of Brexit, Conservative MPs are getting the full enemies of the people treatment from the Daily Mail. And they're getting it because of the investigation into whether or not he misled the House of Commons. When it says Minister tells MPs to resign from rigged Partygate probe, and we're talking about people who are incapable of admitting that Boris Johnson has ever done anything wrong and appear at times to be almost in love with the man, then you don't win any prizes for guessing which minister it is that has called upon Tory MPs to resign from an independent committee, the Commons Privileges Committee, looking into whether or not he misled Parliament. Spoiler alert, he misled Parliament. So what the Daily Mail and Nadine Dorries are actually calling for here is an end to accountability and a cessation of observable reality, a denial of observable reality. We don't want an investigation into whether or not Boris Johnson misled Parliament because we know that he did. That's the position that they're adopting. Just think about that for a minute. Think about what that says about our democracy, about what it says about our country. He's in charge, he's corrupt. That's why he's going. The investigation into one element of his corruption must be called off now because he'll probably be found guilty. And that means he'll get, I think, possibly slung out of the House of Commons, which might mean that Paul Dacre doesn't get his peerage, which might be part of the motivation for this entire mad project. So you turn to page 6 of the newspaper today, and there is a full-on enemies of the people attack on 4 sitting Conservative. That's the bit I can't get my head around. They're Tories. I want to swear. I never swear on their own, but they are effing Tories, these people. You remember that Martin Niemöller poem? We used to quote it all the time. First they came for the... So on this, it would be first they came for the High Court judges, and I didn't do anything because I was a Tory MP. Then they came for the academics, and they came for the professors and the university academics, but I didn't do anything because I was a Tory MP. Then they came for all the Remainers in the House of Commons, but I didn't do anything because I was a Tory MP, Brexiter. Then they came for the lefty lawyers, and I didn't do anything because I was a Tory MP. And then they came for the Tory MPs, and there was nobody left to do anything to help me. So Sir Bernard Jenkin, a former ally of Boris Johnson, Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex, gets attacked by the Daily Mail. Sir Bernard Jenkin, a Tory grandee, is under attack from the Daily Mail, the Boris Johnson fanzine. In fact, that line they've given to him, you remember, it was the enemies of the people for the High Court judges. For Sir Bernard Jenkin, it's the grandee. What's his offence? He can appreciate reality. He can see what has happened. Unbelievable. And his crime? Ahead of Boris Johnson's appearance before the Privileges Committee, Sir Bernard said that the PM should not expect an easy ride. They're even saying it out loud now. So this politician has said Boris Johnson won't get an easy ride, and that has painted a target on his back for the Daily Mail. Because we only want politicians on this committee who will give Boris Johnson an easy ride. They're about as close to admitting it as you can get without actually admitting it. So Sir Bernard Jenkins' offence is to have said that he won't give an easy ride to a corrupt politician during an investigation into the corruption of that politician. Andy Carter is the Conservative MP for Warrington South. He's refused to comment on Partygate investigations. That's not good enough. That makes him dodgy. That's painted a target on his back. He is the magistrate, because down with that sort of thing, magistrates. And speaking of lawyers, Alberto Costa is the Conservative MP for South Leicestershire. The headline he's got, the solicitor. So the people you're supposed to hate today, the grandee, the magistrate, and the solicitor. Right? Down with all that sort of thing. They can't call them lefty lawyers because they're bloody Tories. But it's the same language, the same rhetoric, the same style. The same sort of mugshots with the little lines underneath them. Let's have a look at what Alberto Costa's offence is. It's imperative the next leader of the party and the next PM places standards and integrity at the core of government. How does the Daily Mail report that? Right, you tell me, look me in the eye, does that strike you as controversial? It's imperative the next leader of the party and the next PM places standards and integrity at the core of government. Does that sound controversial to you? Down with integrity and standards. And magistrates and solicitors and grandees. So this is how it gets reported today in the best-selling newspaper in the country. Alberto Costa, Conservative MP for South Leicestershire, made a swipe at Mr. This is like 14-year-old girls attacking you for not loving Duran Duran enough, isn't it? Alberto Costa, all right, Harry Styles, okay. Conservative MP for South Leicestershire, made a swipe at Mr. Johnson last month, saying... It's imperative the next leader of the party and the next PM places standards and integrity at the core of government. Hey, that is so transparently awful. I can't actually believe my eyes. Because Boris Johnson is so obviously devoid of standards and integrity, suggesting that we want a Prime Minister who's got standards and integrity is, in Daily Mailese, it's a swipe at Boris Johnson. Think about this for a minute. And then Laura Farris, the Conservative MP for Newbury. She's described as the Rishi supporter. She worked for Democrat Hillary Clinton when she was a US senator. She's already resigned, and they didn't even notice. So utterly bogus, fraudulent and ridiculous is this journalism. One of the people they've attacked for not resigning from this committee has already resigned from this committee, as she revealed this morning while tweeting that if only they'd bothered to ask me. So... it's funny, isn't it? So I'll read you this from someone called Tom Cook. So, good God, James is boring on about his hatred for the Tories day after day after day after day after day after day. Tom Cook, these are Tories, mate. I'm sticking up for them. They're Tory MPs. That's how baked your brain has been by these people. You think I'm slagging off Tory MPs? Bernard Jenkin is the Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex, Tom. Andy Carter is the Conservative MP for Warrington South. Alberto Costa is the Conservative MP for South Leicestershire. They are under attack from the Daily Mail, and I am defending them. I am sticking up for Conservative politicians who are under a fascistic attack from billionaire-owned media. And you think I'm sticking it to the Tories because your brain has been boiled by your own bigotries, Tom Cook. It's tragic, mate. You've even come onto Twitter to do it. I'm sticking up for Conservative MPs, and because you're a little bit in love with Boris Johnson, you think I'm attacking Tories. I'm literally defending them from an unconscionable attack, which is identical to the attacks unleashed upon High Court judges, upon academic freedom, upon democratically MPs, upon political norms, the illegal prorogation of Parliament, whatever it is, pick your favourite. These are things that need to be defended for all of our sakes. And here I am defending Conservative MPs, and Tom hears me banging on about hatred of Tories while defending Tories. That's what a cult looks like. Tom, you are a complete cult, mate. But it's a reversible process. You just have to decide what you actually believe in. For example, Alberto Costa believes in standards and integrity, but saying that out loud, that's a swipe at Boris Johnson. I believe in standards and integrity. Stop slagging off Boris Johnson, says the Daily Mail. I believe in honesty, probity, decency. Stop slagging off Boris Johnson, says the Daily Mail. I believe in, decency, goodness. Honestly, that's a swipe at Boris Johnson. Every time you say that you believe in something that Boris Johnson so categorically and completely rejects, like integrity, like standards, like honesty, like decency, like the rule of law, like academic freedom, then you're somehow slagging off Boris Johnson. 17 minutes after 11 is the time. That's really scary. But I don't think I've got the skills to communicate my fears to you. I think this, and this is what the phone-in will be, I think we've reached our big lie moment. If I tell you that Nadine Dorries' contribute to public discourse was this, if this witch hunt continues, right, it will be the most egregious abuse of power witnessed in Westminster. This is a member of the government that illegally prorogued Parliament after lying to the Queen, okay? It will be the most egregious abuse of power witnessed in Westminster. This is Nadine Dorries talking about a committee that had a Tory majority until Laura Farris resigned. It will cast serious doubt not only on the reputation of individual MPs sitting on the committee, but on the process of Parliament and democracy itself. This is someone defending a man who has misled the House of Commons, who has lied repeatedly, and who has presided over corruption the like of which we've never seen in British politics before at such a high level. And yet Nadine Dorries is saying that the people conducting the investigation into whether or not he's misled the House of Commons will, when they inevitably conclude that he has misled the House of Commons, because by his own admission he has misled the House of Commons, that will be an egregious abuse of power. That's absolutely insane. And it's British politics in 2022. Zach Goldsmith said something similar, but he's blocked me on Twitter, so I can't read you that in its entirety. But that's a man who is sitting in the House of Lords after being rejected by voters in Richmond Park solely because Boris Johnson gave him a seat in the House of Lords. So here's the thing. I want you to convince me that this is not the British equivalent of Donald Trump's big lie. Thankfully, Johnson's on the way out, and it's highly unlikely that his supporters will mount some sort of coup in an attempt to keep him in power, despite the fact that he has been democratically and legally removed from power, just like Donald Trump was. But this talk of a witch hunt, this talk of an egregious abuse of power, this utter denial of observable reality, this is our moment. To paraphrase Martine McCutcheon. This is our imperfect moment. I think this is the British big lie moment. I just do. And I want you to convince me that it isn't. 0345 6060 973. So when a cultish newspaper defends a corrupt Prime Minister by calling for an independent investigation into his dishonesty to be curtailed, to be called off, to be undermined, that is the same as Donald Trump supporters believing him when he says that he's been the victim of a big lie. Convince me that this is not the British equivalent of Donald Trump's big lie. 0345 6060 973. I hope you can, but you're more than welcome to call me if you can't. Maybe you can just sort of knock the gloss off it a bit, just dilute it a little bit, because I can't believe what I'm seeing today. And it's, as I've said to you a billion times, it's the incrementals. If they sold you the Z on day one, you wouldn't have it. But they sold you the A and then the B and then the C. You get from point to point to point to point to point, when today they are attacking Conservative MPs for the crime of having the power to investigate whether Boris Johnson lied to the House of Commons, despite the fact that we know he did. The only question is whether he did it inadvertently or knowingly. This is absolutely bonkers. But it's also, at 21 minutes after 11 on Monday morning, it's perfectly normal. That's what our politics has become. So persuade me that it's not as bad as I think it is. On 0345 6060 973. Daily Mail is Fox News. Boris Johnson is Donald Trump. Nadine Dorries is Marjorie Taylor Greene. And the witch hunt is the big lie. Spot the bloody difference. Stop the stitch up is stop the steal, as Mia points out. And you don't want to be the guy. You don't want to be the guy who hits the alarm bell, who breaks the glass. You really don't. It's exposed and it's lonely. But I honestly can't see much difference between the stop the stitch up or Tories must quit Boris witch hunt and the big lie in America. Stop the steal, they called it in America. Donald Trump won the last election and they're trying to steal it from him. Is the American equivalent of Boris Johnson should not be investigated by the Privileges Committee because, well, they're going to find him guilty and therefore it shouldn't happen. And the language is the same.
trời chiều không màu nắng ấm, thầm thầm buồn vọng nhớ về đâu. Phương trời xa ai nào hay biết,